A poor family thought they were just buying Thomas Jefferson's old abandoned house for pennies. But when they opened the floor in the basement, they found a hidden compartment that had been kept secret from the world for over 200 years. What was hidden inside changed this family's life forever. Subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. The morning light seeped through the thin curtains of their small apartment in Richmond, Virginia, landing on the cracked linoleum floor where a few unpaid bills lay scattered. James Harris sat at the kitchen table with a calculator, his large, calloused hands pressing the same buttons again and again, as if repetition could change the numbers. Across from him, Olivia tried to untangle her hair before another long shift at the hospital. She had been awake for 20 hours straight, her uniform smelling faintly of antiseptic and exhaustion. Their children, Tyler and Amelia, were still asleep in the next room, sharing a pull-out couch that squeaked with every turn. It was payday, or rather, what passed for one now. The small paycheck James had received from assembling office furniture barely covered groceries. The factory, where he had worked for 15 years, had shut down 6 months ago, a casualty of economic restructuring. He'd been taking whatever work he could find, moving jobs, construction cleanup, repairs, but it was never steady. Olivia's wages as a nurse kept them afloat, though barely. Rent was overdue. The landlord had left a notice under the door, and the electricity company had sent another warning printed in red ink. Their lives had become a cycle of fatigue and fear, one they rarely discussed because the words themselves felt heavy. When the kettle whistled, James poured water into 2 chipped mugs and passed one to his wife. "I'll find something better," he said quietly, though they both knew how many times that promise had already been made. Olivia smiled weakly. "I know you will." She didn't say what she was thinking, that she couldn't remember the last time he looked truly rested, that she was starting to forget what hope sounded like. That afternoon, while searching online job boards, James drifted into the housing section, more out of frustration than intent. The listings were all the same: overpriced apartments, predatory loans, and rent-to-own scams. But then, among the endless columns of text, one headline caught his eye. "Historic Jefferson-era estate needs restoration, low price for quick sale." He clicked, expecting a catch. The photographs were faded and uneven, showing a once grand 2-story mansion with white columns, cracked paint, and ivy crawling over the windows. The description mentioned it was located in a small rural town 2 hours south, on land once connected to Thomas Jefferson's extended properties. It was sold as is, no financing, no guarantees. The price, however, was shockingly low, barely more than what they owed for 6 months of rent. James leaned closer to the screen, half smiling at the absurdity. "They're probably selling a pile of wood," he muttered. But something about it, the idea of a house, their own house, lingered in his mind. He printed the listing and left it on the table. When Olivia returned home that evening, she read it between sips of reheated soup. "It looks like a museum piece," she said, turning the page, "or a lawsuit waiting to happen." James shrugged. "It's cheap, maybe too cheap, but maybe it's a chance." They didn't speak for a moment. The refrigerator hummed in the background, a low reminder of how fragile everything felt. "We'd be putting every cent we have into it," Olivia said finally. "If something goes wrong—" She didn't finish the sentence. Tyler, who had wandered in, picked up the printout and studied the pictures. "It looks cool," he said, "like something out of a movie." Amelia leaned over his shoulder, her eyes wide. "Can we go see it?" That was how, 2 days later, They found themselves driving through the Virginia countryside in their old Chevrolet, its engine rattling as the road narrowed from asphalt to gravel. Fields stretched on both sides, dotted with barns and wind-worn silos. The air smelled cleaner here, sharper, full of pine and damp earth. "Feels like we're leaving the world behind," James said, trying to make the mood lighter. Olivia managed a small smile. "Maybe that's not such a bad thing." When they finally reached the property, the mansion rose out of the trees like a ghost of another century. The driveway was cracked and overgrown. The paint peeled in long curls, and the front steps sagged as if tired of waiting. Yet, despite the decay, there was something undeniably dignified about it. The symmetry, the high windows, the way sunlight caught the edges of the columns. A real estate agent, a thin man in his 50s with polished shoes and little patience, waited at the porch. "You must be the Harrises," he said, glancing at his watch. "It's quite a place, isn't it? Full of history." "Why is it so cheap?" James asked almost immediately. The man's smile flickered. "Well, you know how it is with old houses. Expensive to maintain, hard to insure. It's been on and off the market for years. A few legal complications earlier, but that's all cleared up now." His tone was rehearsed. "It just needs the right family to bring it back to life." Inside, the air was cool and thick with dust. The foyer opened into a wide hallway lined with faded wallpaper and tarnished sconces. The floors creaked under their feet. In the parlor, shafts of light cut through broken blinds, illuminating dust motes like snow. Olivia ran her fingers along the mantel, leaving a clean line through decades of grime. "It's old," she said softly, "but not hopeless." Tyler darted from room to room, opening doors, peering up staircases. Amelia lingered near the fireplace, tracing her hand over carved initials in the wood. Downstairs, the agent led them to the kitchen, pointing out the charming original fixtures that hadn't worked in decades. Then, almost as an afterthought, he mentioned the basement. "There's a small cellar, but it's not in use. Previous owners sealed part of it off. Probably nothing interesting." He hesitated before adding, "It's best to leave it as is." James exchanged a glance with Olivia. "Can we take a look anyway?" The man hesitated, then sighed, "Sure, but watch your step." The stairs were narrow, the railing loose. The air grew colder as they descended. The basement was small, the walls uneven, bricks darkened with moisture. There was a faint smell of mold and old earth. Near one corner, James noticed a section of wall that didn't quite match the rest. Newer mortar, different brick. He ran his hand over it. "This looks like it was added later," he said. The agent shrugged. "Could be. A lot of changes over the years." When they came back upstairs, the children were already asking if they could keep the old place's furniture, though most of it was beyond saving. Olivia took one last look at the cracked ceiling, the faded grandeur of the staircase. "If we bought it," she said quietly, "we'd have to do everything ourselves. Roof, plumbing, electricity. We'd be broke." James looked at her. "We're already broke." There was no anger in his voice, just tired truth. Back in the car, they sat in silence for a long while. The children dozed in the back seat as the wind pressed against the windows. Olivia stared out at the fields, then said, "You really think we could make it work?" James tightened his grip on the steering wheel. "We've got two choices. Keep renting until we're too old to care, or take a chance on something that's ours, even if it's fallen apart." She nodded slowly. "Then we take it." 2 weeks later, they sat in a small law office signing the final papers. The same agent hovered nearby, tapping his pen. James initialed the last page, and Olivia added her signature below. When the documents were gathered, the agent congratulated them and slid over a thin folder labeled Historical Records. Inside were old blueprints, some tax documents, and a photocopy of a typewritten note dated nearly a century ago. James's eyes caught on one sentence at the bottom, almost faded to illegibility. Access to the lower archive restricted. Lineage to remain undisclosed. He frowned, but before he could ask, the agent had already moved on to another client. They walked out into the bright afternoon, holding a single set of keys and the deed to a crumbling mansion. It didn't feel like victory, more like stepping onto thin ice. Yet, as the car pulled away and the old house receded into the distance, Olivia reached for James's hand and said, "We finally own something. Whatever happens next, it's ours." Neither of them noticed how the clouds thickened over the hills behind them, nor how the wind seemed to circle the house, whispering through the cracked shutters as if something inside had been waiting a long, long time for them to return. The first night in the mansion felt like walking into a story they didn't belong to. They arrived with nothing but 2 mattresses, a folding table, a few chairs, and a cooler of food. The moving truck would come next week with the rest of their belongings, though the rest was a generous phrase for what they owned. The house was cold, the walls seemed to hold on to the winter drafts, and each footstep echoed as if the place resented being occupied again. Yet there was something alive about it, too, a quiet hum beneath the creaks, the way a place does when it has been waiting too long for footsteps to return. They gathered in the living room around a single-floor lamp plugged into the only working outlet James could find. Tyler and Amelia sat cross-legged on the dusty carpet, eating peanut butter sandwiches wrapped in foil. Olivia spread a blanket over her shoulders, rubbing her hands together to keep warm. "It's creepy," Amelia whispered, her eyes darting toward the darkened hallway. Tyler smirked. "It's awesome." He'd already claimed the bedroom with the balcony upstairs, despite the peeling wallpaper and missing doorknob. James stood in the center of the room, looking around with the mixed expression of pride and fear. He had spent hours earlier inspecting the fuse box and flicking switches to see what still worked. The answer? Not much. Only part of the ground floor had electricity and the plumbing needed complete overhaul. The local contractor who stopped by had raised his eyebrows the moment he stepped inside and left them with a quote that could have bought another house entirely. But James insisted they would fix it themselves where they could. He'd learned enough handiwork from the factory maintenance to feel confident, though his hands shook slightly when he thought too long about the roof. The house groaned now and then in the wind, like an elderly relative muttering in their sleep. "It's just settling," James reassured the kids, though Olivia knew he was anxious too. When darkness finally claimed the mansion, they retreated upstairs to the 2 rooms they decided to occupy for now. James and Olivia slept in the master bedroom, mattress on the floor beneath a chandelier with half its crystals missing. Tyler and Amelia shared a room at the end of the hall, insisting the door remain open. Hours later, something woke Olivia. A soft bump somewhere below them. Her eyes opened to darkness, and for a moment she didn't remember where she was. Then the cold smell of old plaster and wood reminded her. She listened. Silence. She told herself it was the house, its bones shifting. She turned over and wrapped her arms around James, who slept as if he had used every ounce of energy the day required. His breath was steady. She closed her eyes again. Tomorrow would be better. Morning came with a thin strip of sunlight across their bedroom floor. James woke stiff and sore from the uneven mattress, but hopeful. Today he would start small. clearing debris, checking windows, sealing cracks. He walked downstairs to make coffee using the camping stove they brought. As the water heated, he noticed Tyler and Amelia sitting on the bottom step, already dressed and whispering to each other. "What are you two doing up so early?" he asked. Tyler looked uneasy now, the excitement from yesterday replaced by caution. "We heard something," he said quietly. "In the basement." Olivia, coming behind James, frowned. "Probably mice," she said. "Old houses always have mice." "No," Amelia whispered, her small hands gripping the stair rail. "It sounded like someone moving boxes." James blinked. "The agent said no one's been here for years. Could have been the wind." But his voice lacked certainty. He poured coffee into tin cups and handed one to Olivia, who took it without comment. The basement had tugged at her mind ever since their first tour. That mismatched brick, the quick dismissal from the agent, the cold that seemed stronger there. After breakfast, James told the kids to stick together while he and Olivia checked the basement. They grabbed flashlights, their beams slicing through dust as they walked down the narrow steps. The smell hit them immediately. Dampness, earth, and something old enough to taste like history. The basement looked the same as before. Nothing had moved. Yet James paused in front of that odd patch of wall. "It's different," he murmured. Olivia stepped closer, shining her flashlight. The mortar lines, yes, they seemed fresher, though covered in dust. Someone had reinforced the wall in that exact spot, but why? James pressed his palm against the bricks. Solid. Too solid. "Feels like something's behind here," he said. The way he said it made Olivia's skin tighten. "Maybe it's just structural support," she offered, but she didn't believe it. James stepped back, tapping different parts with his knuckles. Most of the wall sounded dense, but the center of that newer section? Hollow. James lowered his voice. "What if there's another room behind this?" Olivia swallowed. "And what if that realtor knew?" They returned upstairs with more questions than answers, determined to focus on surface repairs while saving the basement for later. They spent hours cleaning, sweeping away piles of plaster, throwing out broken furniture, airing out rooms by opening stubborn windows. Amelia dusted a shelf in the study and found an old framed photograph. A stern-faced man wearing a waistcoat, standing on the lawn where the kids now played. "Do you think he lived here?" she asked. Olivia brushed fingers over the glass. "Probably a former owner," she said, but her gaze lingered too long on the man's eyes. Sharp, observing. Behind him in the photo, barely noticeable, was someone standing on a porch, half hidden by a column. A shadow rather than a person. Near lunchtime, they stumbled upon a small storage room under the staircase. Inside were boxes of old newspapers, stacks of yellowed documents tied with twine, and a metal lockbox without a key. Tyler picked it up. "Heavy," he said. James took it and shook it gently. Something inside shifted. Not coins, but papers, or maybe small objects. Olivia noted the word engraved near the latch. "Archive." "Let's not pry open anything yet," she said firmly, sensing James's temptation. "We have plenty to do before digging into historical stuff." But as they left, a gust of wind slammed a distant door upstairs, and the sound echoed like a warning. Tyler and Amelia froze. Olivia placed a hand on their backs and guided them forward. "Old wood expands," she said. She wanted to believe that. As evening fell, fatigue made them clumsy. James sat on the porch steps with a toolbox in his lap, wiping sweat from his brow. Olivia brought him water, sitting beside him while the children chased each other in the yard. "Maybe we were crazy to do this," she admitted softly. "Maybe crazy is exactly what we needed," he replied. The air smelled of pine and soil, calmer than any night in Richmond. Fireflies blinked near the trees, like sparks guiding a path toward hope. For the first time in months, Olivia let herself breathe without feeling her chest tighten. When the kids came in, laughing and dirty, bedtime passed with stories and promises to make rooms livable soon. Exhausted, they all fell asleep quickly, but late into the night, James awoke again. It wasn't a sound that stirred him this time. It was a feeling, a sense of presence. He slipped out of bed and walked into the hallway. The moonlight spilled from the tall window at the end of the corridor, illuminating dust floating in the still air. Everything seemed quiet until he noticed one thing wrong. The basement door stood open. He was certain he had locked it earlier. His heart kicked hard against his ribs. He moved slowly toward the stairs, hand trembling as he reached for the light switch. It didn't work. The darkness below was impenetrable, swallowing the small beam of light from above. Standing there, he listened. For a long moment, nothing. Then, faintly, like someone brushing against a wooden crate, a rustle. James stepped back, instinct telling him to shut the door. He pushed it closed gently and turned the lock with controlled movements, careful not to make noise. Then he backed away, eyes fixed on the handle as if expecting it to turn on its own. When he returned to bed, Olivia stirred. "Everything okay?" she mumbled. James slid under the blanket, pulling her close. "Yeah," he whispered, "just checking things." But sleep didn't return easily. The image of that open door burned behind his eyelids. He tried to convince himself it had drifted open on its own, but deep down, he knew houses didn't unlock themselves. Something, or someone, had been down there. In the morning, sunlight pushed away the fear, if only temporarily. Over breakfast, James debated saying something, but the sight of Olivia smiling tiredly at the kids held his tongue. They needed stability, not another reason to fear. Still, every time he glanced toward the basement, he felt that same prickle along his spine. The mansion held more than dust and memories. Something waited behind those sealed bricks, something tied not only to the home's age, but to the secrecy that built it. And though James didn't say a word, he knew one thing with absolute clarity. Sooner or later, they would have to open that wall. And whatever waited on the other side was not going to stay silent forever. Days began to fall into a rhythm, though the rhythm felt improvised, like a song played without sheet music. Each morning started with a list of repairs, but ended with more questions than solutions. James patched leaks only to find new ones. Olivia scrubbed the walls only to reveal cracks beneath the paint. Still, there was a stubborn pride building in them. This wasn't just a house anymore. It was a test of their endurance, their hope, their commitment to a life that might finally lift them above the financial edge they had been balancing on for years. The children adapted faster than expected. Tyler discovered a treehouse in the far corner of the property, weather-worn and missing a rung or two, but still a sanctuary. Amelia collected wildflowers, arranging them in chipped vases she found tucked away in a closet. They roamed the yard in carefree bursts of laughter that made Olivia's heart ache. Those sounds had been rare in their apartment back in Richmond, drowned out too often by their parents' whispered arguments over bills. Here, the air itself gave them permission to dream again. But beneath that fresh beginning, something darker pulsed quietly, ignored only because facing it felt too heavy. The basement door remained locked, yet James checked it every night more than once. The memory of finding it ajar lingered with him like a cold fingerprint. He told himself he was imagining the rustles and shifting sounds from below, that old wood and stale air made noises he wasn't used to. Even so, when evening came and the sun dipped behind the trees, his body tensed, waiting. The turning point happened on a Tuesday morning when Olivia decided to sort through the boxes they'd found in the storage room. She opened one labeled 1937 and discovered stacks of letters, some brittle and sealed with wax. Others were spread loose, ink fading to soft shadows. She settled on the couch, carefully opening one envelope marked in elegant script, Miss Eleanor Whitmore. Inside was a letter from a man named Charles Montgomery, dated 1941. He wrote with urgency, "The matter of the Jefferson documents grows dangerous. Please ensure they remain hidden until the rightful claimant can be identified." Olivia read that line twice, chills rising beneath her skin. Jefferson documents. She didn't know much about history, but she knew Thomas Jefferson was not merely a past president. He was an architect of the nation, a figure whose private writings would be priceless. Before she could read further, Amelia rushed in with a jar in her hands. "Look, Mom." Inside, a large beetle scratched against the glass. Olivia jumped, startling the girl, who laughed before releasing the insect outside. Olivia watched her daughter run, full of joy, unburdened by secrets written in old ink. But the letter pressed at her thoughts. She folded it back into its envelope and placed it aside to show James later. Meanwhile, James picked his way through the attic, flashlight in hand. The space was cluttered with dusty trunks, a torn chaise lounge, and portraits of stern people whose faces had long been forgotten. Near the far wall, he stumbled over a rolled-up rug and found, underneath it, a rectangular iron panel set into the floorboards. He crouched down, brushing away cobwebs. A keyhole glinted. The panel was heavy, immovable without something to unlock it. He called down to Olivia. She joined him, wiping hands on her jeans. "This house keeps hiding things from us," she murmured, "or waiting for us to find them," James said. He didn't like how true that felt. That evening, after dinner, they gathered in the living room. The lantern cast warm light over the table as Olivia handed James the letter she had found. He read it slowly, frowning deeper at each line. "Jefferson documents," he muttered. "What does that even mean? Papers the president wrote? That would be worth a fortune." "But why hide them?" Olivia asked. "And who's the rightful claimant?" James shrugged, with the question lodged in his mind like a thorn. Whoever built brick over the basement wall had done so recently enough that the mortar still seemed newer than the surrounding structure. And now, this letter, scattered clues leading in one direction. Tyler, sitting on the floor sorting through old coins he'd found in a drawer, looked up. "Maybe there's treasure down there," he said with a grin. Amelia nodded eagerly. "Like pirates?" James smiled weakly, though his heart beat faster with possibilities. "Not pirates, sweetheart," Olivia said, "but maybe something important." The night passed quietly at first. Then, sometime near 2 in the morning, Amelia appeared at her parents' bedside, trembling. "I heard someone talking," she whispered, voice thin. "Downstairs. A man." James shot up, adrenaline flaring. He reached instinctively for the baseball bat he kept leaning against the dresser. Olivia slid out of bed and wrapped her arms around Amelia. "It's probably just the wind," she soothed, but the child shook her head furiously. "No, he said archive." "I heard it." James and Olivia exchanged a look, wide-eyed, terrified. That single word connected too strongly to the lockbox, the hidden wall, and the letter. "Stay with your mom," James said. He crept into the hallway, gripping the bat like a lifeline. The basement door remained shut. When he laid his palm against it, it was ice cold. He heard nothing at first, but then, the faintest scrape from the other side of the wall, like someone dragging their nails across timber. He returned upstairs, shaken. Neither he nor Olivia slept much afterwards. In the morning, they tried to bury the tension with work. James began chipping away at flaking paint on the porch. Olivia called contractors, hoping to find someone cheaper. The children kept close, sensing the unease their parents tried not to show. Around midday, James noticed a car pull into the driveway. A middle-aged woman stepped out, dressed in a tailored beige suit that contrasted sharply with the rural setting. She approached with confident strides and introduced herself as Catherine Alder, the town's Historical Society director. "I heard someone finally purchased the Whitmore property," she said. "I wanted to welcome you to the community." James invited her inside, offering a seat in the dining room. Catherine looked around with sharp eyes as though assessing the worth of every object. "This house was once owned by descendants of Thomas Jefferson's cousin," she explained. "It has connections to significant periods of American history." Olivia, curious but cautious, brought up the name Charles Montgomery. Catherine stiffened slightly. "Yes," she said after a beat. "He was a collector. Some say a bit obsessive. He believed this property held valuable artifacts." When James asked what kind, Catherine's gaze flicked towards the basement door before she replied brightly, "Oh, documents, trinkets, who knows? Many myths surround this house." But she refused to elaborate, and her smile looked forced. Before leaving, she placed a business card on the table and warned, "If you find anything unusual, you must inform the Historical Society immediately. Some items are protected under federal law." Then she walked out without another word. James stared at the card long after she drove away. Protected under federal law meant priceless and dangerous. That evening, the family sat together, tension thick in the air. "If there really is something hidden in this house," Olivia said, "it could solve everything. We could fix this place, save money for the kids, actually breathe again." James nodded, knowing she was right, yet unease shadowed the thought. "But if it's worth something, others may want it too," he said. "People who won't ask nicely." They all glanced toward the basement door, closed and dark. Something waited behind those bricks. Not ghosts or monsters, but history itself, sealed away for a reason. The decision to investigate wasn't made aloud. It happened in the silence between them, in the determination that hardened their eyes. Tomorrow they would take tools downstairs. Tomorrow they would break through. But as they climbed the stairs to sleep, the house seemed to exhale, its beams groaning softly in the settling night. A floorboard creaked, slow and deliberate, somewhere in the depths below. The sound traveled through the hallways like a warning, like a voice unspoken for too long. James placed his hand on the basement door once more before bed, still cold. When they finally fell asleep, a draft slipped beneath their doors, and the wind outside whispered across the aging brick and rotting shutters. It sounded almost like words spoken through teeth that had clenched for generations, and the house, with all its secrets, waited for morning. Morning sunlight crept slowly across the walls of the old dining room, but no one seemed to notice its warmth. The Harrises gathered around the table in silence, hunched over bowls of cereal and toast that no one tasted. Sleep had been a stranger last night. Even the children, who usually woke with unrestrained energy, moved quietly, as if the house itself had pressed a heavy finger to their lips and warned them not to disturb what slept beneath. James stared at the basement door from across the room. It remained closed, but the memory of that cold handle lingered like a bruise. He pushed back his chair abruptly and stood. "We're doing it today," he said, trying to sound decisive rather than afraid. Olivia nodded, though her fingers tightened around her mug. Tyler and Amelia didn't speak. They didn't need convincing. They had been waiting, too. The tools were gathered, a hammer, a crowbar, a small sledgehammer James kept in the trunk of the car from his brief stint doing construction cleanup. Flashlights were checked. Dust masks pulled from a box left by the previous owners. They were preparing for something simple: demolition. But everything about their movements felt ceremonial, like a team of explorers about to unearth a tomb. Before heading down, Olivia paused in front of the hidden lockbox they had found earlier. It still hadn't been opened. She brushed off the dust again, running her finger over the engraved archive. Until now, it had been a curiosity. After reading that letter, and after Amelia's terrified whispers of a man's voice, it had become something else entirely. A clue, maybe the first of many. In the basement, the air was colder than ever, as though the temperature dropped with their footsteps. The single bulb overhead flickered weakly before going out completely. James cursed under his breath. "Flashlights," he said. Beams of white light cut through the shadows, but only barely. They stood before the strange section of wall, newer brick, smoother mortar, unmistakably different from the rest. James placed his hand against it again. Still hollow, the cold seeped through his skin. "All right," he whispered. "Here we go." The first strike of the sledgehammer echoed like a gunshot. Dust rained down, and a thin crack formed across the mortar. The children flinched but didn't leave. They stood close to Olivia, watching with wide eyes. James swung again, harder. The crack widened. Again. Again. Each blow seemed to wake something in the house. The floor beneath them trembled just slightly, or maybe that was their nerves. Finally, a brick loosened and fell, clattering onto the concrete. A trickle of stale, icy air rushed through the opening, air untouched by sunlight for decades. James lowered the hammer, breathing heavily. He reached in and wiggled another brick free. Then another. It was slow, grueling work. The dust burned in their throats, but curiosity consumed fear, and soon a hole large enough to shine a flashlight through appeared. James lifted the light and peered in. At first, he saw nothing, only darkness that looked strangely thick, like it clung to its own edges. Then, as the beam settled, shapes materialized: shelves, crates, and something metallic glinting in the far corner. His pulse quickened. "There's a room," he said. "A whole room." Tyler stepped forward, excitement creeping past the fear. "Can I go in?" he asked. "Absolutely not," Olivia snapped. "We don't know what's in there. James goes first." James nodded. He knocked out more bricks until the gap widened enough for him to squeeze through. He stepped inside carefully, boots landing with a dull thud. Dust swirled through the beam of his flashlight. The room was roughly 8 feet wide and maybe 12 feet long, walls lined with rotted wooden shelves. Boxes stacked high, labeled with dates going back as far as 1820. But the most striking object sat in the center, a wooden chest with metal reinforcement, its hinges rusted but intact. It looked like something from a museum exhibit, old but preserved, as if deliberately protected. Olivia crawled in behind him, leaving the children outside but within sight. She stared at the chest and then at James. "Do you think—" she started. "Documents," he murmured. "Maybe what that letter was talking about." Together, they knelt beside the chest. James dusted off the lid, revealing initials carved into the wood. TJ, not fancy script, just purposeful, deep strokes, as though carved in haste or secrecy. Olivia felt her breath catch. TJ, one of the most famous sets of initials in American history. But that was impossible, wasn't it? James found a small rusted padlock secure in the chest. He looked at Olivia. "Get me the toolbox." While she retrieved it, he examined the lockbox sitting on the shelf near the chest. This one, unlike the one upstairs, bore a small, etched inscription he hadn't noticed before. "Property of the Jefferson estate. Unauthorized access prohibited." Catherine Alder's warning echoed in his mind. Protected under federal law. He swallowed hard. Olivia returned, and within a few minutes James snapped the padlock clean with bolt cutters. The sound of metal breaking reverberated through the sealed room like a gunshot. He hesitated only a moment, then lifted the lid. Inside, wrapped carefully in linen, were stacks of leather-bound journals, each tied closed with ribbon. The edges of the pages were fragile, but the handwriting visible through the gaps was elegant, sharp, unmistakably from a different era. Olivia lifted one gently, like holding a newborn. The cover bore a date, 1805. She untied the ribbon with trembling fingers and turned to the first page. "My name is Thomas Jefferson Whitmore, and I record these entries not for vanity, but for truth. There are matters too dangerous for public eyes, secrets concerning the founding of our nation and the preservation of liberty, secrets that must remain hidden until the future proves safe enough for light." Olivia's heart hammered painfully. "Whitmore," she whispered, "the family that owned this place." James leaned closer. "Named after Thomas Jefferson," he said. "Maybe even related." Olivia turned the page, scanning quickly. She stopped suddenly, gripping the edges of the journal. "James," she breathed, "listen to this. The greatest danger does not come from outside, but from within our own government. There are men who would twist the ideals of our new nation for their own power. Therefore, the documents entrusted to me, those bearing the personal seal of President Jefferson himself, must never be found by the wrong hands." Everything around them seemed to freeze. The stale air, the dust drifting through their flashlights, even their thudding hearts. Olivia looked at James with wide, terrified eyes. "These aren't just personal journals," she said. "This is about the founding of the country." Tyler and Amelia, unable to contain curiosity any longer, squeezed into the room. Amelia looked first at the journals, then at her parents. "Is it treasure?" she asked. James exhaled shakily. "In a way, yes," he answered. "Something more valuable than money." Tyler frowned. "But can it help us? I mean, we bought this house to fix things." Olivia squeezed his shoulder. "We don't know yet. We need to protect it, whatever it is." Then a shadow moved. Not metaphorical, a real, creeping shape cast across the far wall, growing, stretching. James spun around, flashlight searching, but there was no one else. No place for anyone to hide. Yet the shadow had been unmistakable, human-shaped, fleeting, gone. Amelia whimpered and pressed into Olivia's side. Tyler's bravado evaporated. Olivia tried to calm them, but her own hands began to shake uncontrollably. "Let's get upstairs," James said quickly. "We need to think before we touch anything else." He closed the journal gently and placed it back into the chest. They crawled through the opening, emerging into the main basement with relief, as if surfacing from deep water. James replaced a few bricks loosely, not to reseal the room. That would be impossible, but to make it less obvious. They hurried upstairs, lights flicking off behind them. As they reached the kitchen, they realized everyone was breathing too fast, adrenaline burning their lungs. For a moment, they simply stood together, silent, gripping each other like they might disappear. James finally spoke. "We need help," he said. "Someone who knows what we're dealing with. Someone we can trust." "And not the Historical Society," Olivia said immediately. Catherine Alder's fake smile flashed in her mind. "They would take everything. They'd push us out, maybe worse." James nodded. He thought of lawyers, journalists, academics, but none felt safe. Then his eyes fell on the card Catherine had left on the table, and beside it the old photograph Amelia had found. The stern man on the lawn, the faint shadow of someone watching behind him, the name engraved below, Colonel Samuel Whitmore II, 1903. Olivia followed his gaze and understood instantly. Whatever the Whitmore family had carried through generations, whatever they had sworn to protect, it had all funneled down into the walls of this house, into that room, into the chest they had just opened, into their hands now. Tyler broke the silence. "So, what do we do?" James placed his hand on his son's shoulder, voice steady but low. "We're going to figure out this story and find out why our family ended up as part of it. But first," he turned toward the living room where the lockbox from the staircase sat waiting, silent but persistent. "We open the next piece of the puzzle." Before they could move another inch, the front door rattled violently, as if someone on the other side shoved hard against it. Everyone froze. A second shove. Wood groaned. James ushered the children behind him, stepping forward slowly as Olivia reached for her phone with trembling fingers. The third shove came with force, then silence. James waited, heart pounding. When he finally opened the door, cautiously and with the bat in hand, the porch was empty. Only the wind, the rustle of trees, and a single sheet of paper laying on the welcome mat, folded, crisp, deliberate. He picked it up and opened it. 3 words were printed in black ink: "Do not dig." He looked out at the empty driveway, the silent trees, the long road leading to town. Someone knew. Someone was watching. And if the Harrises continued their search through history, they wouldn't be doing it alone, or safely. The past had awakened, and it did not want to be disturbed. The morning after the warning arrived, the house felt different. It was not only the silence, though that was heavy enough to notice. It was the tension that had seeped into the walls overnight, a kind of awareness that came from being watched. Olivia kept glancing toward the front windows while she made coffee, as if she expected someone to be standing on the porch again. James sat at the kitchen table staring at the folded paper. He had read the words 100 times. They were still only 3, printed in block letters that gave away nothing: "Do not dig." But every repetition made them sound more personal, like a command whispered in his ear. Amelia and Tyler sat quietly, eating cereal in the living room, sensing the change in their parents without understanding it. The kids had stopped asking about the chest or the documents. Amelia still peeked down toward the basement when she passed the hallway, but she didn't linger anymore. Even the house itself seemed to hold its breath. By mid-morning, James decided they could not keep waiting for whatever was coming. "We can't sit here and hope this goes away," he said. "Someone knows what's in that room. If they're warning us, it's because they think they have the right to take it back." Olivia turned from the window, her face pale but determined. Then we find someone who can help us before they do, someone who knows how to handle this kind of thing." They agreed to drive into Charlottesville, the nearest city with a law office that specialized in historical property rights. The trip took nearly 2 hours. Amelia dozed in the back seat while Tyler watched the fields roll by. James's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly the whole time. He couldn't stop thinking about how easily everything could collapse. The house, the discovery, their fragile sense of safety. At the law firm, they met a man named Richard Pierce, a quiet, bespectacled attorney who listened without interrupting while James explained the situation. When he described the hidden archive, the warning note, and the Historical Society's earlier visit, Pierce leaned back and steepled his fingers. "If your account is accurate," he said finally, "then you're dealing with something that may have federal significance. That means people will come for it. Historians, government representatives, collectors, maybe even descendants of the Jefferson family. You need to establish ownership rights immediately." James frowned. "You mean we could lose it?" "Not if you act quickly," Pierce said. "The contents of your home are legally yours, but if they are proven to be of national importance, you could be compelled to surrender them, unless we can negotiate shared custodianship. It's a complicated fight, but not impossible." Olivia nodded. "We don't want to hide anything," she said. "We just want to protect what's ours and make sure it isn't stolen from us." The lawyer adjusted his glasses. "Then you'll need documentation, photos, scans, an inventory of every item you found. And you'll need to prepare for media attention. Once this gets out, the story won't stay quiet for long." When they left the office, the afternoon sun was blinding. Olivia walked a few paces ahead, her bag clutched to her chest. James followed, his thoughts heavy. "Do you think this could ruin us?" she asked as they reached the car. "Or save us," he said, "maybe both." That night, after they returned home, James began photographing the journals and letters with his phone. He laid them out carefully on the dining table, taking one shot after another while Olivia recorded notes beside him. The words were nearly unreadable in some places, the ink faded and the paper brittle, but even fragments hinted at a story larger than their imagination. Plans, payments, land grants, and names of men who had shaped the country. Tyler helped by scanning the clearer pages with the old printer they'd brought from Richmond. "These could be worth millions," he said under his breath, but Olivia corrected him gently. "They could be worth the truth." Around 10 o'clock, there was a knock at the door. Not a loud one, but firm, measured. James froze. Olivia's hand went to her chest. He moved toward the door, stopping just before the handle. "Who is it?" he called. A voice replied, calm but unfamiliar. "Mr. Harris, this is Agent Miller with the Virginia State Historical Protection Service. We received reports of possible artifacts found on your property. I'd like to ask you a few questions." James hesitated. There was no such agency he had ever heard of. Olivia shook her head slightly. He called back, "Can I see some identification?" A pause, then, "Of course." The man slid an ID under the crack of the door. James picked it up. It looked real enough, but something about the design felt off. "We've had threats," Olivia whispered. "Don't open it." James nodded. "Come back with a warrant," he said loudly through the door. "We're represented by counsel." There was silence, then footsteps moving away. When James finally opened the door, the porch was empty again, and a black sedan idled at the end of the driveway before disappearing down the road. Sleep was impossible after that. James sat by the window until dawn, watching the tree line. When the sun rose, He went outside and found fresh tire tracks leading up to the house, and footprints near the side window of the basement. Whoever had come had tried to look inside. Later that day, Pierce called with news that chilled them further. "I've been contacted by a firm representing descendants of the Jefferson estate," he said. "They're filing an injunction to prevent the removal or sale of any materials found on the property. They're claiming those papers are part of Jefferson's private archive, unlawfully retained." Olivia sank into a chair. "Can they do that?" "They can try," Pierce said. "And they will, but the documents were hidden long after Jefferson's death. We can argue abandonment and subsequent ownership transfer through sale of the property. Still, you're about to be in the middle of something much bigger than you realize." The following week was chaos. Letters from law firms arrived daily. Journalists began calling after a rumor leaked online about a family uncovering lost Jefferson papers. Someone had posted a photo of the mansion, taken from the road, with a caption asking if the new owners were sitting on stolen history. Tyler was mocked at school, his classmates joking that his family was going to jail. Amelia came home in tears after someone told her their father was a thief. Olivia wanted to pull the kids out altogether, but James said that would only feed the gossip. "We can't hide," he said. "Not anymore." They met again with Pierce, who brought another visitor, a historian from the University of Virginia named Dr. Helen Briggs. She was a tall, calm woman with gray hair tied neatly at her neck and a voice that carried both authority and empathy. She asked to see the journals. After examining a few pages, she looked up slowly. "These appear genuine," she said. "But it's not just their authenticity that matters. Some of these letters mention land transactions and private accounts related to Jefferson's plantations. If verified, they could change what we know about how he managed his estates and about the lives of the people he enslaved." James felt the weight of her words. The discovery was no longer just a financial question. It was moral, historical, personal. Dr. Briggs proposed a solution. "If you agree to collaborate with the university, we can help authenticate the documents and ensure your ownership rights are protected. You'd retain a portion of any revenue from exhibitions or publications, but you'll also be part of correcting the record, bringing truth to light." Olivia hesitated. "Will that stop the lawsuits?" "Maybe not immediately," the historian admitted, "but it will make you visible in the right way. Once the public sees you as partners in preservation, not profiteers, it will be harder for anyone to paint you as criminals." James looked at Olivia. They didn't need to speak. The decision was already made in their eyes. By early summer, the Harris family had become an unlikely national headline. The university announced a joint research project to study the Whitmore-Jefferson collection. News crews camped on the road outside the mansion. Reporters shouted questions whenever James went to the mailbox. "Did you really find Jefferson's lost letters? How much are they worth? Are you the rightful heirs?" At night, the family sat together in the living room, the television turned low as another reporter speculated about their motives. Tyler hated it the most. "They make us sound greedy," he said, "like we're just after money." Olivia placed a hand on his shoulder. "Let them talk. We know the truth." But the pressure didn't stop there. One evening, as James drove back from the grocery store, a pickup truck followed him all the way up the long dirt road to their gate. The truck slowed, headlights glaring in the mirror. Then someone threw a rock that shattered his taillight before speeding off. When he got home, he was shaking. Amelia saw the broken glass and began to cry. "They hate us," she said. "They think we stole something." Olivia held her daughter close. "They don't hate us," she whispered. "They just don't understand yet." The court hearings dragged on for months. The descendants of Jefferson's family argued that any property containing his signature was part of his estate. Pierce countered that the materials had passed through private ownership several times, making them legally independent. The judge postponed ruling until the documents could be authenticated. Meanwhile, the university team worked tirelessly in the mansion. Dr. Briggs set up a temporary lab in the study, where she examined the ink composition and paper fibers. She treated the Harris family with respect, always reminding them that they were stewards of history. One afternoon, she called James and Olivia into the room. "You should see this," she said. She pointed to a letter where Jefferson's seal appeared faintly pressed into the wax. "This isn't just correspondence," she explained. "It's a draft of a speech he never gave, one that mentions a plan to grant freedom to certain enslaved workers. If this had surfaced earlier, it could have altered his legacy entirely." James stared at the parchment, feeling both awe and unease. He thought of his own ancestors, of names lost in census records, of the stories erased by time. Somewhere in those papers, he realized, was the echo of his family's history, too. By the time autumn came, the lawsuit was still unresolved, but the Harrises had gained something intangible: legitimacy. The university partnership gave them credibility. Donations poured into the restoration of the mansion. The once crumbling walls were repaired, the roof replaced. Journalists shifted from skepticism to admiration. Yet James could not shake the feeling that every gain came with a cost. Their privacy was gone. Their peace was gone. One night, after the house had quieted, he found Olivia sitting in the study with one of the journals open before her. "Do you think we did the right thing?" she asked softly. He sat beside her. "We told the truth," he said. "Even if it hurts, it's still the right thing." Olivia touched the page gently, tracing the handwriting that had changed their lives. "Maybe truth is the only inheritance that really matters." Outside, the wind rustled through the trees, carrying the faintest echo of voices long silenced. Somewhere, deep below, in the hidden archive they had unearthed, the air no longer felt heavy. The secrets that once demanded to stay buried were finally finding their way into the light. And though the fight was far from over, the Harris family understood that the real treasure they had uncovered was not gold or papers or fame. It was the power to reclaim their place in the story of a nation that had once written them out. The first winter in the restored mansion came quietly, with frost crawling up the tall windows and wind whispering through the trees that bordered the property. Snow had settled across the Virginia hills like a clean page, covering the deep scars the land had carried for centuries. Inside, the Harrises sat together by the newly repaired fireplace, the flames dancing on faces that no longer looked frightened but changed in subtler ways, older, steadier, tempered by everything they had endured. The months of hearings, arguments, and interviews had taken their toll, but the noise outside their lives had finally begun to fade. The courts had delivered their decision 2 weeks ago. The documents would remain legally theirs, but under joint custodianship with the University of Virginia. It was a compromise neither side had expected, and yet, somehow, it felt right. James often said he could breathe again, though even now there were nights when he woke and listened for footsteps in the hall, expecting the past to come knocking again. But no one came. The black sedan stopped appearing at the end of the driveway. The angry letters stopped arriving. Even the reporters had moved on to other stories. The mansion, once a burden heavier than they could bear, had begun to feel like a home. Every day now had its rhythm. Olivia returned to her nursing job in town, but kept a regular schedule that allowed her to be home in the evenings. She had stopped taking extra shifts. The exhaustion that had shaped her face for years began to lift. On weekends, she helped Dr. Briggs catalog the last of the papers. She worked quietly, reverently, as though she were tending to the memories of the dead. The historian had become a friend to the family, someone who could speak both the language of scholarship and that of simple decency. It was she who had first suggested that part of the house could serve as a permanent exhibition space, a small museum that would tell not only Jefferson's story, but the Harris family's as well. The idea grew naturally, without ambition. It was not about fame or profit anymore. It was about truth. The truth buried in letters, in ink faded almost to dust, in the quiet persistence of those who had been forgotten. They named it the House of Voices, and when the first visitors arrived, mostly local schoolchildren and teachers, Olivia guided them herself. She showed them the photographs of the discovery, the journals preserved behind glass, and the timeline that traced how one family's search for a home had uncovered another family's hidden history. Tyler helped her design the displays. He had become something of a local celebrity after giving an interview about the discovery for a student newspaper, though he hated the word celebrity. "I just told the story like it happened," he said. He had turned 17 that fall and grown taller, his confidence solid now, though it was a quiet kind of strength. He still played basketball, but had begun taking extra history classes, something that would have made his old coaches laugh. He said he wanted to study law someday, so nobody could ever scare us again. Amelia had changed too. Her drawings, once of flowers and fields, now showed people. Faces of all colors, some imagined, some taken from photographs of the past. In one, she drew the mansion with two silhouettes standing on the porch, one of her family today and one of a woman holding a child from 200 years ago, their outlines almost merging. When Olivia asked about it, she said, "They were here before us. I just made sure they could see the house again." The picture now hung near the entrance to the small museum, where visitors stopped to look longer than at anything else. James spent most mornings outside, fixing fences and tending to the land. He had decided to plant a small orchard behind the house, apple, pear, and cherry trees. "We might as well make the land feed us," he said. But in truth, it was more than that. Working the soil gave him a kind of peace he hadn't known he needed. Every shovelful of earth he turned felt like a way of reclaiming the ground beneath his feet, ground that had once belonged to men who would never have imagined a family like his owning it. Sometimes, when he stopped to rest, he thought of the names in those journals, names of the enslaved people Jefferson's cousin had once owned, and he whispered them out loud. He didn't know why. Maybe because no one else ever had. The museum's opening day was modest but meaningful. Local news covered it, but without the frenzy of the past. The ribbon was cut by Olivia, though she insisted the honor belonged to all of them. Dr. Briggs gave a short speech about preservation, about the importance of stories that refuse to stay buried. Then she invited James to speak. He hadn't prepared anything, and when he stepped to the small podium, his palms were sweating. For a moment, he looked out over the gathered faces, neighbors, students, strangers, and words failed him. But then he found his voice, deep and steady. "My family came here because we were broke," he said. "We didn't know history was waiting for us under the floorboards. We didn't know that what we'd find would be something bigger than us." We thought maybe we'd find a fresh start, but we ended up finding a mirror. This house showed us who we are and who we came from, not just us, but all of us. It showed us that history doesn't stop belonging to people just because someone decided to write them out of it. When he finished, there was a long silence before the applause. Olivia reached for his hand, and he squeezed hers tightly. For once, the silence that followed didn't feel heavy. It felt right. After the crowd dispersed, the family lingered in the exhibit room. The journals rested under their protective glass, the parchment illuminated softly by the warm light above. The letter with Jefferson's seal, the one that had started it all, sat at the center, framed with a small plaque that read, "To preserve liberty, one must preserve truth." Olivia brushed a tear from her cheek. "Do you ever wonder why it ended up with us?" she asked quietly. James smiled faintly. Maybe it didn't end up with us. Maybe it was waiting for someone who'd listen. That night, the four of them sat together on the porch, wrapped in blankets against the cold. The air smelled faintly of smoke and apples from the nearby orchard. Tyler leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "You think people will keep coming to see it?" he asked. "Some will," Olivia said. "Some won't. That's not what matters." "What matters then?" Amelia asked. "That they'll remember," James said. "Even a few of them, that's enough." They fell into comfortable silence, watching snow begin to drift down. Somewhere in the house, the floorboards creaked softly, but now the sound was no longer ominous. It was the house breathing, alive again, not in menace, but in peace. Later, as they prepared for bed, Olivia paused by the fireplace where the first journal had been opened months before. She could still picture that day. The dust, the fear, the hope tangled together. It felt like a lifetime ago. She ran her hand along the mantel, tracing the grain of the wood. "Do you regret it?" she asked James, who stood behind her. He shook his head. "Not once. We were meant to find it." He paused, then added, "But sometimes I wonder if it found us." Olivia smiled softly. Maybe both. Weeks passed, and the rhythm of their new life deepened. The museum grew busier. The university continued to publish papers about the documents. One evening, they received a letter from Washington, an invitation from the National Archives to loan part of the collection for a national exhibit on hidden histories. The letter ended with a single line. "Your family's discovery has reminded us that history is not owned by the powerful, but shared by all who live in its shadow." James folded the letter carefully and set it on the table. "We'll do it," he said, "but the originals stay here. This is where they belong." The years ahead would not be without challenges. Fame had its price, and money still came and went like the tide. But the family had found something deeper than wealth, a legacy built on truth, endurance, and connection. Tyler earned a scholarship and left for college the next year. Amelia continued painting, her work gaining attention beyond their small town. Olivia found fulfillment not in escaping her past, but in standing firmly within it. And James, who once thought of himself as a man forever struggling to keep his head above water, discovered that survival wasn't just about endurance. It was about planting roots where others said none could grow. On the first anniversary of the museum's opening, they held a small ceremony for the local community. As the crowd dispersed and the lights dimmed, Amelia slipped away into the basement, where the opening in the brick wall still remained. She stood there for a long moment, looking into the darkness beyond. The air was still and cool, carrying the faint scent of earth and old paper. She whispered softly, "Thank you." though she wasn't sure to whom. Then she closed the door gently, locking it not out of fear, but respect. When she came back upstairs, her family was waiting on the porch, and the night sky above was clear. The orchard trees shimmered in the moonlight, their branches heavy with the promise of another spring. James put his arm around Olivia, and together they watched their children laughing on the steps, the echoes of their joy mingling with the soft sounds of the land. The house stood behind them, quiet but no longer haunted, a place reborn from struggle, carrying both the weight of the past and the light of what was yet to come. In that stillness, James realized that their journey had never been about uncovering secrets for the world. It had been about uncovering themselves. The mansion had given them something no amount of money or recognition could buy: belonging. The snow began to fall again, gentle and slow, covering the fields where history slept. Inside, the fire burned steadily, and through the tall windows the faint glow of the flames painted the walls in gold. For the first time in a long time, the Harrises were not running from the past or reaching for the future. They were simply there, together, at peace, living in the house that had once been a mystery and was now, finally, home. Don't miss what happens next. Subscribe now and keep watching our videos. The next story is already waiting for you. Share this video with someone who loves stories that change everything,